Hi everyone. I'm going to start this kind of layout session. This will be about um, how to make a poster layout and different ways to graphically show all the things you might want to show for your A2 assignment and into the future. So I'm just going to start out by showing some examples of posters that I've made in the past to give you a sense of kind of what's possible and different ways to show the same thing and to make things look nice and cohesive. So this is a big project. That was a group project, so don't worry if it looks a bit intimidating. A whole bunch of people worked on it about the neighborhood of Riverdale. So it's at the same scale as what you guys are doing, like looking at a neighborhood. And you can see this is one way to show kind of a more bigger context map of more of Toronto, and then a figure ground map, which is this map that's in black and white that shows built form versus non-built form. So you can see it's just creating a little box around the area, then a line in between them, then making the frame the same color. And it helps kind of attach the two maps in a way that is useful. And you can see the flow. It kind of goes to an introduction just about the neighborhood in general. Then it goes to legal context. You see, depending on how you want to communicate it, sometimes it's easiest to just do bullet form, because especially with some legal things, oftentimes if you just say it in your own words, you might kind of actually change the meaning. So it's up to you how you want to present that. And here's like a kind of detailed neighborhood map that was made partially, like the base was made in a GIS software, and then on top there were like lines put on it. For you, it could be drawn, or depending on what you're using, to add all these details about like paths that are used or little districts that are important. And you can see there's these little arrows with circles at the end and pictures to kind of gesture to the space. So you could be referring to a very specific like location or landmark if it's something that you want to point out and you have a picture of that. Or it can be more general, like a lot of these are just, Greek town in general or the residential core. And here with this technique of kind of making this caption, where you have a picture, you put this black semi-low opacity, you lower the opacity of a black box, and then you put writing on top of it. Or you can do different colors as long as they contrast. It's a good way to kind of not cover the entire picture, but make really good use of space and explain the relevance of what you're trying to show. And so here, if you want to talk about demographics, there's a lot of ways to show them. You can have just paragraphs, and you can create graphs in Excel. I'm sure a lot of you already know how to use Excel graphs to a certain extent. And you can even have kind of cool like infographics. So this is just really like writing, and then there's a low opacity box, and then a circle where a PNG image of an icon has been inserted into it. So I can show you an example of how to do that and where you might get your icons. There's a lot of websites out there like flaticon.com or the Noun Project, that are websites where you can just search up like house and then get a house icon. And that can be just really useful for drawing the eye. And now here's a different example of like showing things on maps without doing direct lines, which can kind of sometimes get a bit busy. So here we have, number 4, and then number 4 refers to this specific spot, and it's also a node. It's not the prettiest map, but I would urge you to not worry too much about prettiness and focus on clearness, because if you make everything the same color because you want to make it look nice, it might be hard to tell colors apart and things like that. And you can see like putting these pictures together like this, there's one imaginary rectangle on top, and then you make the gaps between all the pictures sort of the same gap, and it makes the eye, it kind of makes the eye feel like it's one big picture, like it's one collage. So that's a good way to show a couple of pictures, and same example down here, trying to make the spacing the same and using InDesign's tools where it shows you if the space is the same, to make it look not too busy and make it look like you meant to have all these pictures here. Here's a land use map. This is something you might do in GIS, where you show the different land uses. And yeah, there's a lot of kind of, if you look at the titles, there's these big titles that have these sort of pictures behind them, which I can show you how to do. And these middle titles that tell you what the paragraph's going to be about. And then there's kind of smaller divisions of bullet points, or, you know, saying like, this is what you're going to talk about, and then describing it a bit more. Complete commercial strips, and then describe it a little bit more. Here's another example. I want to show off kind of, this is a context map, and then this is a way to show a figure ground map if you're really close up and there's not that much detail to show, because it's a park, so you just need to really see the surrounding buildings. And then this is another way to show kind of key elements where you have a title and then pictures, and then you can even embed more details. And another way to show pictures is these circles, which are pretty cool. I think people generally like circles, but they can be a little messy sometimes because they'll cut off the corner of your picture. So you can put images into circles and then do the same thing where you kind of have a blackish background. I think this was used doing a shadow effect on the writing. And then these lines with these little circles that you put at the end. You do these in the same way as making arrows, but instead of arrowheads, you put circles. And you can point to specific areas and describe things about them. Here I want to point out, like, showing how people are using space. The thickness of arrows can be a really useful tool. So like a lot of people go this way, but not that many people take this route. Another little icon circle thing with a quote can be interesting. And here, showing strengths and limitations in these kind of almost, it's like a table, but it's really just a box and a box. And then we've related it to the pictures by going like A, and then you look for A, and so it's the industrial context, a bit of description, and then showing in images the industrial context. And I think that's really effective. And for this much description, it's easier than putting it right like beside the picture. You can just designate like this space and this space will be used for pictures and this space will be used for writing, and it can make it easier on you. And I like this picture of a man enjoying the rain. Okay, and here's one of the beach's corridor. So this was a corridor analysis. So depending on your neighborhood, you might have a corridor that you want to kind of analyze. Here's another example of showing the figure ground and the context map. Here the context map is just the outline of the city of Toronto. You see there's like still the scale bar, always include that. And then a point, and in the circle, this is your figure ground, just to show where this is in the city of Toronto. And then there's a kind of closer up neighborhood context image. And so here's another example of like key features. You can tell I've sort of copied and pasted from my Sugar Beach one. because once you have a format that works, it can be really useful. And you see I've used like numbers here. So 1, it's Kew Gardens, and 3, there's an interesting streetscape design, whatever you want to point out. And some of them, it's really flexible. Some of them are like legend items, like these bollards. Some of them don't even refer to anything. They're just talking about an element that doesn't have a specific location. And yeah, so this is a section. This is a street section map. So this is my example for you. I made it in Illustrator. There's quite a bit of detail. I took a picture to help me like remember the actual elements that were physically there, like the street lamp, and I drew a lot of things with rectangles. But this is kind of going a bit above and beyond. You don't have to put this many details to make it a street section. The most important things are the measurements down here, showing the traffic flows, and the sidewalks, and the building facades on the sides. So there's a Tim Hortons here, so I kind of took a little Tim Hortons logo online and plopped it on a red box, and kind of created a cartoony version of the facade. But really, for you, it could just be a line that goes like this and this, and having the measurements written. And now we'll do a whole other tutorial on how to create something like this. Here's a corridor analysis, so it's showing again usage with different arrows and zoning and public transport. More kind of user pictures, putting a bunch of circles in a nice line is a nice way to show some things. And then yeah, strengths and limitations thing. It's a lot similar to the last one. And here we've got a little India, so it's also a neighborhood one. And this one, it's just showing City of Toronto, and it's showing a dot. So that's where it is in the City of Toronto. It really can be as simple as that. And I took this City of Toronto outline from like GIS. And then because it was a corridor, there's a lot of space on the sides, so I put some circles with arrows and some little captions. But this one looks kind of a bit busy. It's a bit to look at, but it's effective. You can look at what it's pointing at and get a sense of what the area is. There's these colorful boxes and behind points that attach to a photo, so you can kind of relate this text to this photo. More of these collage type things where you have this box, you're going to put a whole bunch of photos in here and you're going to say something about it, and they all have even-ish spacing in between. The more even, the better. And then there's this one you can see right below where there's no spacing. And that can be all right. It really looks like a collage. I tend to prefer the ones with a little bit of spacing. It just helps your eye figure out where things end, versus this where I just feel like it's too much color. But maybe if you wanted to just convey like color is everywhere, it's not important that people understand each scene individually. And yeah, and so there's a little conclusion down here, and as well as your pie chart. So hopefully this gives you some ideas. I'm going to share how to do these little elements in the next part of the video. All right, so in this section, I'm going to kind of just, before I get into how to physically make individual elements, I'll go through the process of like when you're starting assignment and you want it to be a poster, how do you set that up? Like, where do you even start? So a habit that I've got into is you gotta read your assignment really thoroughly about all the elements that should be here. So here's a kind of a guideline of all the stuff that should be there. And it seems like the focus is this top part, which is that you have 2 key elements of each of these kind of aspects of your neighborhood. So in total, there's these 6 key elements that you're going to analyze. And then a lot of this other stuff is just kind of, it's context to set up like what your neighborhood is. Yeah, so what does key mean? Yeah, that's up to you. You're going to be hearing a lot of that. And you can see here that the poster is 11 by 17 with everything included, but you're allowed to include the references in a separate page. So if your professor allows you to do this, I usually recommend it. It's a lot easier than leaving a whole bunch of space at the bottom to write all the references small, but that's an alternative way to do it. And then you can use like in-text citation methods, or you can use numbering. And yeah, so I would take all of this and I would go to open my InDesign document. So create new, it said 11 by 17 inches. So I know that this is a tabloid size. If you're not sure, make sure you just check in inches, but it's 11 by 17. For this case, since it's only one page, you probably don't want to do facing pages. It's not going to help or do anything. Either orientation works. The examples I showed you have the vertical orientation, but I guess for this example, just so you don't get stuck in the mindset that it has to be one, I'll do horizontal. And yeah, there's margins set automatically. I usually leave them. You can always change it. So create. So I've created this, and the first thing I usually do is go and copy things from the assignment. So this is a whole bunch of bullet points about what you need in it, and it's good to not be constantly going back and forth. So when you want to up the size of the text, you can like click up and down, but you can also just scroll. I'm pretty sure that works for all people. I just scroll while hovering in that box, and I'll bring it to a size that's more legible. So we have a key map showing the location of your neighborhood within the city, a figure ground, and sometimes it kind of ruins that, but you can still read it, a street sections, so possibly multiple, and analytical diagrams. So yeah, this could be actual diagrams like physical or like maps of the neighborhood, or it could be graphs, pie chart, anything. And your identification and analysis of the 6 elements. So this is a big chunk. And a conclusion. And also academic citation, but that could go on another page. You could be just recording that in a Word document separately, which is what I would do in this case. Yeah, and so also I think what's important is this to describe the 6 key elements. So I'll just put it under 6 key elements. I'm going to delete the academic citation because you will, well, in my case, I would do it separately. And yeah, so it explains 2 key elements for streets and streetscapes, 2 key elements for housing and density, and you'll probably have to show the examples and write some analysis. So you can imagine it's text with a picture or a diagram or a map, and then space for a conclusion. So I would just make this a separate point so you remember you need something for conclusion. So yeah, a simple way to start is just by outlining spaces for each thing. So if you already have elements, of course, drop them in. But to make a general outline, you might just decide, okay, so there's a font. I'm going to do whatever title my title is, my neighborhood. And then I would probably make boxes to indicate each space if I didn't already have something that's going to go there. So, you know, we're going to need a key map. And you can also use the text box as a box because you're just going to replace it with something. You're going to need a figure ground, and I'll show you ways to incorporate these. And so at this point, we don't know what size everything is going to be, but we know that the text should never get smaller than 12 point, maybe 10 point if you're really pushing it. But if this was a poster that was printed out, 12, minimum 10 point font would be what was actually legible to someone who's like right up near your poster. So try to keep it at that. It's less important now that it's online, but it's still important to be realistic if you want to make these posters in person one day. And so you've got your key map, you've got your figure ground diagram, you're going to have street sections. So if you've ever seen a street section, you know it's usually kind of like longer than it's wide. I think you've made some before. So say there's a street section, and maybe there's a second street section because you want to show two streetscapes, but it might just be one. And analytical diagrams for different demographics. So let's just say there's a demographics section. So this might include text, images. And you see I'm just like, for now, I'm making these in some sort of row. Some people asked how we can keep things in the same sort of, a couple people actually asked how to keep things like measuring the same amount when you stretch them out. Like if you've already organized all of these things to be in this nice row and you want to stretch things out. So you can always do this. Just highlight everything and stretch it this way. But you'll notice like that shows a lot more of the map. So when you're stretching things in different perspectives, it'll just close the frame around the map and not actually make the map smaller, for example. But on Mac, if you hold Command Shift, and I assume it would be maybe Control Shift on a PC, you can shrink everything at the same time and it shows the same kind of perspectives of the map. Another way to do this, if you are not great with remembering those key combinations, is to transform and scale. This way you can do like 55%, and you want to make sure it's locked. And then you can go back to 100%. And this is a way to always get it right and never like distort anything. You're just making it smaller or bigger. Okay, so you've got, so far, I've outlined a place for all these. Now we've got the identification and analysis of 6 elements. So there's a lot of different ways you could do it. You might want to kind of make a list of what your elements are and what you want to talk about before you start to build this. But basically, you know that there's like 3 categories. So if there's something about street and streetscape, which maybe your street sections, they fall under there. And then we've got housing and density. And we have public realm. So maybe something that you'll want to do, you're not sure yet, like once you get everything down, you could want to show all these elements on a map, by either like using numbering or pointing to things, and show where they are in the neighborhood. So you could have an additional map right here, maybe to show these elements, or not. Maybe you just have like bullet points and photos within each section. And maybe you want to make these all even. Just remember that people often go like left to right, up to down. So, you know, demographics could be up here if that's like the first thing you want to read because people are reading across. And street sections could go under what you're showing about your streetscape. And then we could have housing and density presented in whatever way, public realm. And always one component you don't want to forget is your conclusion. So you don't want to end up at the end of it not having any space for conclusions. So conclusions are often just text boxes. I know it looks really messy right now, but I often start doing things just like this so that you can easily move things around. So yeah, I usually drag and drop maps, but that might not be the easiest thing for everyone to do. If you make a frame, which is using this tool, and then you can copy a picture and press paste into. So that's also something you can do with circles. And I'm actually going to move over to the cool elements so you can get more of a sense of the sort of things that you'd actually be inserting into this. So sometimes when you get a lot of elements on InDesign, it can get a little overworked, and since I've been copying and pasting a lot of stuff, it's a bit lost. Make sure to kind of close any other programs that are not currently in use. Like try not to have Illustrator and InDesign open at the same time if your computer seems to be suffering. But yeah, so let's zoom in. I'm going to show some examples of how to place images and have captions on them, because kind of the main 3 rules I have are like, don't just have an image just floating on its own, put it beside related text, make it point to something like this, or have it numbered and then the numbers relate to either text or a place on a map, or have a caption that like describes why it's there. So I'm going to do view overprint preview. This cleans everything up. It makes it so that you don't see all the lines. I find this useful when I'm just trying to see if something looks okay. And yeah, so sometimes a lot of pictures can be overwhelming. I put a lot of pictures, but stick to things that are actually important and relate to your analysis if you're going to use pictures, which I recommend if you can, even if they're like Google Street pictures. If you have something that you want to analyze, it's always good to paint a picture as well as have a map. So this is an example of, this is Sugar Beach in Toronto. And I will show you kind of basically how to make this component where you're pointing to something. So you first drag in your map. So this is a map, and I want to point to it and put a picture. So, oh, I need a picture first. Urban life. Let's drag it. My desktop. All right. So I want to take that picture and point to a point on the map with a circle, let's say. So I would do ellipse frame tool. I hold shift to make the circle even, because if I don't do that, it turns into all these wonky things. And generally, if you have a circle, you want it to be a circle and not an oval. Right now you don't see anything because of an overprint, but I'll turn that off so you can see that the frame is there. Now I would go to the picture of urban life that I've just grabbed, and I drag it right into the circle. Right now it's super big, so I would double click into it, and then I'm kind of like smooshing my fingers together on my trackpad. Or what you can do is you can find the edge of it and you can grab it like that and make sure it stays in the frame. And you do that until you're seeing what you want to see. And so we've got this picture in this frame, and when you double click, you can see where the actual full picture is. And when you move this, you also want to hold on shift so it doesn't distort the image. And yeah, so you have this circle now, and it's showing something, and maybe you want to put a caption over top of it. So you would drag a text box, and what I tend to do is white over black text, but you can also do black over white text or any other contrasting colors. So if I write description of element, obviously you'd have an actual description. And okay, it's pretty big because we're at 12-point font. That's pretty much as big as it can go. I'm going to change my font to Arial just because I like how simple it looks. The font is the color filled with white. And maybe I'll center it because it looks kind of weird on the circle not being centered right now. So that's kind of hard to look at. You can't really clearly see what it says if you had an actual description. I'm going to make this bigger again, holding my Command Shift or Control Shift so that I'm moving both the circle frame and the picture inside the circle in the same way. And now to create an effect on this, I could go to under Properties, I go to Effects, and I might do Outer Glow or Drop Shadow. Both of them can work. And I make sure that Preview's on. And I make the screen mode black. Maybe I set it to normal. Yes. Multiply. Yeah, I think multiply works well. I can put the opacity. You can see here that it's changing as I do this. I'm going to put the opacity pretty big. Then it makes it stand out a bit more. There's also the option of drop shadow. So you click on that and you see it's kind of created a shadow, but it's a little bit off. So sometimes I make just the distance smaller, so it's just like creating a surrounding thing, but either of these can work to make the background a bit dark. You can also do precise, so the difference, it's softer, precise. And it creates kind of this like black cloud around it, so that when you put it on something, the writing stands out. And then the final touch is making one of these lines. So you just take the line tool. This is also how you can make arrows. You point to where you want it to go. You increase the stroke. You want it in black. Oh no, that's not the stroke. You gotta increase the stroke. And now if you press stroke, you've got all these different options. You can make it have dots. You can make it kind of like hashed, dashed, and I like the dots. You can also just use a solid line. And then at the end of it, this is how you add arrows, so you can add an arrow. If it's the wrong way, you click this thing and it switches it around. So now the circle is pointing to a specific spot on the map. But you can also get creative. You can use these squares and it's like showing a little square area. And yeah, so that's an example of how you can do that. Another way to add captions to images is just to simply put in the image, you drag to whatever size you want, put a text box, well, not a text box, put a box, a frame, and then make it a color, and then put a text box on top of it. Description of element. So if it's like a really dark color, then background, then do a light text. If it's a light colored background, do a dark text. To change colors, you can always kind of click in and get more subtle colors than the ones given to you. And to change it to be the same colors as other colors, highlight what you want to change. So I'm clicked onto the box, and then now I'm going to click onto this, and it's the same color. And if you wanted to number it so that you could put the numbers on the map, it's kind of the same thing over again in terms of you make a shape, then you choose the color. I'm going to make it the same color as these, and then you put a text box on top of it. And it's number 1. Maybe you want to center it a little bit more. Maybe you want to make it white so it stands out against the darkish blue. And you can zoom in, you can center. And one thing you can also do is, if you want this to stick together when you copy and paste, you can create a group. So now, like, this is just one thing, and you could copy and paste it. And then to get into it again, you can like click in a couple times and do 2. If you want to ungroup at any time, you just right-click ungroup. You can also use Command G to group and ungroup. And yes, this is another way to make a simple caption and make sure it's connected clearly. You can also have like a little bit of a gap, or just right underneath, but to make it clearly connected, this is another tool you could use. Another thing you can do is create these sort of photo grids. So there's no really trick way to do this. You could create an outline of where you want your photos with a box, just as a guideline, if that's helpful to you. And then you I'm going to pretend that these are all different pictures, but I'm just going to copy the same ones over and over again. And you just fit them into a box. It can create a really nice effect to have like this similar level of spacing, and you don't always need to see the entire photo. So if I have a photo this size and I'm trying to fit it in to this space, but I decide that really just the people on the ground here in the middle of the street are important, I can move it and put the frame to where I want it to be. and go on until I fill up this whole grid. And then here I've used a different method to kind of create a background for a caption, where I just put a box on the bottom and make it black, and then you change the opacity. So depending on how dark your picture already is, or how distinct, or how much you care about seeing the background behind it, you can make it different opacities, but something like that's good. And then you put description of elements. And that's a way that you can not fill. You need to click into the text box and fill it with text, not the text box. And yeah, again, if I want to make the size smaller, I can scroll while I'm holding above there. You can just make it fit, and you can copy and paste that, this like kind of format, and then put different pictures. So if I copy this picture, and then I say paste into, the picture I had copied will replace that one, and I can kind of expand it with my mouse. Right now it has another frame on it, so what you want to do when you're copying and pasting photos is make sure you're at the brown box level, which is like the actual image, and then paste into, because if not, you can have infinite frames within your frames. And this is a way that you don't have to like make the little box at the bottom every single time. And yeah, so that's a cool tool. Again, you can pair it with putting numbers in the corner of the picture and then relating them to numbers in the text box you're talking about. So this is a whole bunch of different ways to use photos with captions and relate them to the rest of your content. Another thing that you'll probably want to know is how to show your kind of key map and your figure ground map and a context map of Toronto. So keynotes are that you can do it any way you want. They could just be two boxes beside each other, or a box overlaid on another box, as I've showed you here. They're only meant to set the context unless you're giving a lot of descriptions within the key map, like you're using it to show other stuff in analysis. It doesn't need to be big. It could be really, really simple. So, for example, this is like a map showing the context within Toronto, and then here's a figure ground map. And so there's just been kind of the figure ground map has been put into a frame. And then an outline was created on it. So stroke is this, and you're creating some distinct color. And then on the actual map, on the bigger map, you could point. You could actually copy and paste because it's already got the same styling, and then delete the picture inside and create a frame around the part where this figure ground map is showing. And then you could connect them with a line, and you want to style the line the same way maybe, so you use the little eyedropper tool, and you click on that, and it makes it the same so that you can kind of relate the two maps together. So this is just an example of a way to do it. There's a lot of different ways, as I'm showing here. This is like a really detailed one, but then here's just an image of Toronto, a dot of where this is. This is a map of Toronto, and then I've kind of highlighted in red where Sugar Beach is, and Then this is the figure ground. Because it was just a small site, I only needed to show like 4 buildings. And this is a circle that's within a square frame. So maybe I'll show you how to do that if you ever want to learn. Here is a circle. You could fill it with a picture. You could fill it with everything. And then if I had a square frame like this, I can take this circle and I can paste into the square frame. So it doesn't look any different now, but if I drag it, it's like within this rectangle. And you can do a rectangle within a circle. You could do a circle within a circle within a circle. It can just get a little bit confusing. So I try not to use this unless it's the only way to create an effect. But this is cool because then now I could put a picture that's like the same size. Oops, I've replaced it. I can do a picture and then drag it to be the same size. Put the frame down here. And arrange tool is also really important. I can send this to the back, and there we go. And I could put my figure ground right into here. So I usually just drag and drop things. You can see the background shows through on a PNG, so that's also an interesting tool. If you have PNG images that are like transparent, you can change the background to go with whatever theme. And here's a really simple one. It's a map of Toronto. It's the outline of Toronto that I got off GIS, and then a circle where I've pasted into the figure ground map, and I've put a dot, which was just made by doing a little circle and filling it black. And then here I think I created a sort of see-through white triangle shape by using the pen tool, deleting an anchor tool. But this can be a little complicated. It's always better to use Illustrator if you're going to be creating new shapes. It's just a tool that's meant for it. But again, it's similar to the black caption box where I put some low opacity, and it looks kind of like the box is, the circle is popping out. It's indicating where it should be. But yeah, it's similar to this. You can use this direct selection tool to edit these points. It's the way I do it. You can make it kind of point to anywhere. I think that's a cool tool as well. And yeah, and here's like a very simple example of a context map. You can just put a square, and then the square represents where this zoomed in version is, and you just put a square, a rectangle over a rectangle. And if you want to like create some distance when you're putting something over something else, you can kind of create a shadow like this. So I showed you the shadow tool for words, but so we've had this box, it represents one map, and then on top of it, we want to just put on another box that represents another map. And we just want to make a shadow maybe so that it looks more clearly separated, especially if maybe the colors of the map are similar. So you would do a drop shadow, and you've got your preview here, so you can see it's like a pretty big shadow. You might want to change the direction so it's more onto the map. If you change the distance, it changes kind of how far it is. You change the opacity to make it lighter or darker. And this can be a good way. I'll show you what it looks like with an actual map inside. So say we've got the figure ground here and another map here, and maybe make the background white so it's not so in your face. And that's a good way, again, to show different maps. But make sure they each always have their own north arrow and scale, even if it means the north arrow and scale become really, really small. And it's kind of something you have to plan in advance. Sometimes it won't fit exactly where you expect it to fit. Yeah, so these are different examples of how to show your key map, your context, your figure ground. Here's a way to do icons. They can be useful for things like demographics, where you don't really, like if you don't have a graph, or you have a graph, but there's just not really that many images and it's ending up as a big text box just describing things. This can be a cool way to just add some visual interest, but remember, maps and like images are always more useful. Don't just use these for everything. And here I've used it to represent, like, it's an eye, so this was the vision for this park. So it's a different way to say vision, and just have an interesting quotation. So I often get my things from Flat Icon or the Noun Project. I have results showing here for different things. So you would go and you would search, like, I don't know, apartment, if that was something you wanted to show. And I usually tend to stick to like the simplest icon I can see. I like the ones that are bold, but you can always get your own style. You can download it as a SVG. Things like the Noun Project are free. I use these even though you're supposed to credit the author. You can do that in your citation, but generally, for if you're not going to publish something, it's not too big of a deal, in my opinion, although Juicy might tell you otherwise. Sorry, Juicy. And I'll save that image, and I can now have it here. I can drop it in. So you'll see here, it doesn't really do very well. It's an SVG image. You could also just instead save it as a JPEG. And if I expand this window here, you can see that there can be more options, I think, somewhere. Oh yeah, you can edit the icon. Oh, you need to log in. Yeah, so this is why I like downloading with SVG, because in Illustrator, I can open them and edit them as I wish without signing in. So I'll drag the SVG to open in Illustrator so that I can change the color, basically. So I can make it editable in InDesign. Yeah, but basically something like this, I just create a box, I fill it with a color. Usually colors look better if you lower the opacity, especially if you're just going to put black text on top of it, or gray text. Gray text can kind of create a nice effect. I think you see it's a bit gray here. And then I draw a circle that's the same length. I'm again holding shift so that it stays completely circular. I fill it in with some sort of bold color, so that when I put the icon on in white, it's pretty clear. You can also just put it in a light color and put the icon in black. But here, if I now take it from this, I copy it and I paste it, it's here, and I can change the color, so I can make it this color. You'll see it's grouped together. If it's not, make sure to group, but it's already grouped. And holding shift, I can resize it. I can resize it and put it kind of approximately here. I can change it to different colors to increase the contrast. That looks kind of nice. And I can even paste it into the circle. So now it's like kind of one object. And if I double click in, I can move it around. And that just makes it easier for the long term. And then you can paste other icons into there, replace it, and they'll kind of show up in the same position. And then just another text box, 50% apartment buildings. You've got your font and whatever size you want. And these are pretty flexible too, like these sort of boxes with icons. You can shrink this down. Again, if I just hold Shift and do this, it'll keep the circle there, but it won't change the image inside. So your Command, Shift, and shrinks it down all together at once. Or Transform Scale is also a tool you can use for that. And you make it aligned, centered, make the text box, and you can fill this in completely. There's also a tool to kind of generate random text, just so you can see what something would look like, but I don't know if it's something that you would really need to do, but sometimes it's helpful if you need like a general word count, but you can go to type and fill with placeholder text, and it just fills it in with this kind of gibberish lorem ipsum text, so you can imagine how much text you can fit there and see what it looks like. And so that's how to get an icon. Again, you can use the noun project or flat icon. And then we have notes on titles. So this is a title style that you've noticed that I'll use a lot. It's not really that important, but if you want to know how to do this, it's dragging a picture into a box and then coloring the box in whatever you want the dominant color to be. So now it's green, and then you click so that you're on the picture. So you can see this is the picture box, which I'm shrinking and growing with my mouse. And then you make the opacity of the picture, not the whole box, the picture. You can make it whatever opacity you want. So you could just have a subtle thing. You can give you the vibe of the neighborhood. And then you can put a text box of bold text over it. My neighborhood. And, of course, this works better with very clear, bold text styles. You can make it any size you want. But, it's just a tool to have something interesting and to really separate big sections out. Like when you have this whole line across the page, that can be helpful to know, like, okay, we read all the stuff above this line first. And then the key is just to make things consistent. Like choose one text size, probably from 10 to 12 point font for your main text, and make sure it's all the same. Same color, same font. And then, for kind of middle titles, have one, bigger titles, and then your biggest title. Consistency is the main thing. Make sure whoever's reading it is going to read it from left to right, up to down. And you can use really whatever fonts you want. Make sure it's legible and not something super, super fancy that no one can read. I don't know, what's an example? Well, that one's just impractical. Probably not that, unless you're alluding to like some style in the neighborhood, like, I don't know, you put Victorian letters, and but I like to just keep it simple with things like Arial or Source or Avenir. Yeah, but that's just one tool, but I'll show another video how to set up paragraph styles if that's something of interest. I can go back to the tutorial topics. There was some interest in paragraph styles, but more interest in grids. And I will also do one on multiple pages, but since you don't need that for the assignment, I thought it could wait. Responding to comments, how do you show housing density and public realm in the poster? So public realm could mean anything. If we go to the assignment description, what is it saying? Public spaces, public realm. So this could be, public realm could be something that you show with pictures like this, with descriptions. Housing and density could be statistics. If you want to show a bar graph, or you want to show facts about your neighborhood in this sort of way with icons, or you want to actually gesture to a part of your map and say, like, for example, like, oh, this area here is high density residential apartments, and in contrast to this here is, I don't know, medium density commercial. It's completely up to you and what you want to show, but do try to not just have text box when there is a way to communicate it in a different way, or to show it. So I hopefully that answers your question. Yes, I will make a master page tutorial next week, probably. How to change the spacing of a row of uniform images and how to scale the image and the frame together. So I've already kind of gone over that, but one more time, if you want to scale things together, you can click both of them, and you can always group. That also helps sometimes. But even when you group, if I just hold shift and move, it, completely changes where the image is. So it's control or command shift on Mac, and whatever the equivalent that is for PC. When you hold both of those together, it scales everything together instead of scaling things, only the frames and not the pictures within them. It's a little bit trickier if you do have like a bunch of things lined up, and you don't want to change it to be scaled at the same time, but you want to like make it longer, for example. So it's like if you have all of these and you stretch it out like this, okay, not like that. Let's see. Oh yes, like that. So it's gonna do something not the best to them, but that is how you kind of make things even. One way to get a better result would be to like make it longer like this, and then maybe highlight what you're willing to sacrifice, which could be like the bottom of these pictures, and do that. Right now it's editing the text as well, but if you don't want to do it, I would ungroup, because right now it's all in one big group, and highlight just the pictures here. And that would be one way to make it fit into a space that's like thinner and longer than the initial space that you had planned. It can be a lot of labor to make changes like that, but at least you know now how to scale things at the same time. Any formatting tips that people miss? Adding a name, date references. So as we discussed, you could put references on a separate page. She's given permission to do that. A good place to put your name and date. You don't necessarily need the date, but if you want to have the class or the name or references, is just to put it at a bar on the bottom. You can just get a fairly small text box and stay right on the right on the border. And you could put your name in like this. Laura, this is my very long last name. And you can put these little lines that are something on your keyboard, and you could put date, you could put professor, put assignment 2. And that's just a very simple way to include that information and have it not be that visible. I would often take that information and maybe make it in a text that's just like a little bit lighter. So I'd double click into this, maybe not that way. I could go here and I could reduce it to just like be a little less dark than the normal text. So that way it doesn't stand out as much. In terms of my cool elements, I've used the same technique and often with posters so that it kind of, it starts and ends in the same way. It creates a little sandwich of color that makes the whole poster seem a bit cohesive. So you can do that even with just bars of color. You put your little name under there. I mean, in this case, this would be kind of dangerous because if you went to print it, it's outside of the margin, so it might get cut off. But since we are in the digital realm, something like this, you'll know it will for sure show up. What tools help us incorporate the images better so they don't look like separate images and since they make sense? So yeah, that's kind of what I tried to describe here. Putting captions, putting them together in a collage and making them feel like they're in a box instead of just kind of placed everywhere. Captions, numbers, pointing. These are all tools. This is another example of like, I don't know, you're talking about the same item. I'm talking about the splash pad, and here is it being driven over, and here's people sitting on the splash pad. So it relates these two pictures together in a way that just shows the two different uses that I wanted to show. I'm here to make this kind of, let's see what it looks like without all the boxes. Oh, here also you can see if you do want to put some sources for mapping, just like very simple light gray sources right under the map. So you can see how this looks. It's created by just having a stroke of white around it. And I think versus this, it just makes it look a lot cleaner because you can distinguish between the two pictures. So yeah, you just do white and then a stroke, and you can kind of make it bigger or smaller. It looks like it's almost taking a little bite out of the circle. So there's a lot of different ways, obviously. There is no one way. Using circles sounds fun, but it can be kind of hard to position them in a way that doesn't look really messy, while collages like this can be just a lot simpler and they fit into the squares that you've designated. And so I hope I've answered all those specific questions. Going back to your general outline, you're gonna have to start filling in information before you know how everything is going to look. But this is a good way to imagine how much space you have and put things that are kind of the same at the same level. So it's like if you have these streetscapes and they're under street and streetscape, let's say, and you want people to know that like these are the 6 key elements that you're talking about. They can, all start at the same level in a way that communicates they're all equally important. And you can even put a sort of medium title. So this is your key elements of the neighborhood. And by just using this kind of like text box method, it just helps you visualize where things can be. You might do key elements and then this takes advantage of the space that the title's not taking up. But it's always good to have it just be really clear and like a hierarchy. And remember, for this assignment, I think the focus is on the key elements, so you want to make that really clear. Like maybe the demographics don't even take up this much space. And you can always just move things around. So maybe this little square here is where you're giving kind of your neighborhood background, maybe an introduction even before demographics to describe where your neighborhood is. And then maybe you start on key elements. And like I said, you could have street sections that you're talking about here in your streetscapes, and maybe you label them and then you refer to it in your streetscape. Maybe you have 3 little sections, and there's a map, a bigger kind of key map, or you're referring to the key map with numbers or letters or pointing. So it's like public realm point 1 is a plaza area. And then you're like, this is why the plaza is important. Of course, you actually write real things. And then you have a map here, and let's just put this map. So this map is of your neighborhood. And okay, well, you probably also want to make key elements smaller because it's not as important and you're creating a hierarchy. So you make it bigger than your little titles here. Also, how to make bullets and remove bullets. These bullets are actually taken from your Word doc, so they're actually just little icons. But to make bullets in here, you can use the bullets or numbering, and you can format it in different ways. But say this is a title of some sort. Make it a little bit thicker. And then you can also use this tool to make everything in all caps, or make it in this kind of interesting thing where it makes it all caps, but real caps are actually bigger. So that's a quick tool to distinguish things. But yeah, so it says 1 plaza. And then maybe you have a map that shows where that plaza is, and it has the number, you have the number 1 in a circle. It's a circle, it's a blue circle, or maybe it's just a white circle, and then you use maybe the same font so that people can identify that that's what it's referencing, and you put it over your map. And this is the plaza, let's say, and grouped it together. And if you view it without all the boxes, it looks a bit better. So like 1, and then maybe you even want to make an outline on the circle so it shows a bit more. Or if you've grouped them together, you can make a drop shadow again. You can see it's kind of far away, so I'm going to make the distance closer. And there you go, it's like sticking out from the map now. And you know that this is referencing that. And maybe right under here, you have a picture of the plaza. And now you've related the picture to both words, like an explanation, and you've related it to a place on the map. So you can kind of combine all these tools in different ways. This layout is just one example. There are a million ways that you could lay this out, but it's always going to be a process depending on what your neighborhood is and what you're showing about it. And yeah, the key is to make sure you leave a good amount of space in between things, which I'm not the best at. I usually pack it in. But yeah, making sure all your fonts are consistent, laying things out, and then being ready to be flexible, or making your components before you drop them in. But usually for me, it's kind of everything's happening at the same time. And so, this is also something I hope you know, or else it can be really frustrating to lose all the elements, but you should be creating everything in a folder. So maybe it's called assignment 2. And that folder stays in the same place when you're working, and you put all the photos and all the maps and everything that you have linked in here, and you keep it in that folder and don't move it, because if not, you will lose the links. And that can be really frustrating. If you lose the links, you can always go back here. So say I move this picture and I move it somewhere else. Now when I come back here, it's lost the picture. It says, oh, I can't find this picture anymore. So you double click and you go to the place that you know you moved the image. I don't remember where I put it. Okay. And then when you click on it, it'll relink. But if you move that image again, it's going to lose it again. So try to work all within the same place. And yeah, that's kind of the basics. There's obviously a lot you can do with the fonts and the stylings. But I think that's it for now.